Thank you very much for persevering. You've just got to wade through me before lunch, and hopefully won't keep you too long. Well, I'm hopeless with this stuff. Let's check that it works. Okay. Yeah, we've heard some really interesting stuff this morning, and certainly it's going to be a hard act to follow. So what I'm going to try to do here is take you back. We've heard a lot about the technical advances that are coming to us. We've heard a lot about the new infrastructure, and clearly these things are happening, and they're happening very quickly. One of the figures that we saw, that we heard yesterday, which stuck in my mind, was that in the next 5 years, the population of smartphones in the world is going to triple. So clearly this is upon us. It's something which is going to change our landscape. The young lady who put that picture together for me, I happened to remark to her that it looks remarkably like Jackson Browne. And she looked at me, who? It's a generational thing. Some of you will probably know. Those of you who, I think in Bruce's words, are more seasoned, might actually know the answer as to who he is. But anyway, it's not Jackson Browne. So really what I want to do is take you back and talk about how we got into communities, our thinking behind it, a little bit about then how we've introduced mobile into communities, some of the issues that we've had as a result of that, and hopefully paint something about the way forward. So our initial interest, I think probably a lot of people got into communities this way, but our initial interest was sparked by the possibility of using online interviewing instead of focus groups. And we started doing that. There are some obvious advantages. First of all, for instance, you can get groups of people together from around the world. You don't have to go and travel to see them. You can link them up and you can talk to them. So that's a real benefit. And obviously that brings with it a huge cost benefit as well. However, we also found that it really wasn't satisfactory in terms of research experience. And the reason was that we were losing the nuances and the interaction that you get with a normal focus group. So we were finding that whereas on one hand we were getting a big advantage, on the other hand we were losing something. But we also felt that there were enough inherent advantages in this methodology that we should pursue it. And the thing that really made us pursue it more was the fact that we realized that you could expand these communities over a period of time. And in the case of ours, we typically expand a community over about 2 weeks. Now this gives us a great advantage because what it enables us to do is it enables us to put ideas, material and so on into the group. It then allows us to get ideas back from them, and then we can change that material according to what they say, put it back in. So in other words, we can iterate, and we can do that over a period of time. And that gives us a huge advantage in terms of the sort of material that we can get back from them. So there were 3 trends really that made us look more closely at communities, which kind of helped us to if you like, deliver that advantage. The first one is the one we've been talking about a lot, and this is the maturing of the digital environment. Consumers are becoming much more familiar and capable with new technology. And as we saw in a number of presentations, mobile phones are becoming an integral part of people's lives. And in fact, I think somebody mentioned yesterday that they're almost like a limb, and you can see this. I mean, if people are using their phones 250 times a day on average, then clearly there's something going on there, and it's certainly very much part of their lives. Oops, that's the laser. The second one is changes in the consumer. And we've heard a lot about this too. We know, for instance, that consumers are much more engaged now. We know that they are wanting to have a say in the brands that they buy. and they want their opinion to be heard. So we have to find a way of engaging with them. Static questionnaires probably aren't enough. We need to have a dialogue with them. They want to understand that we are listening to what they're saying. So that was another trend which made us think that this was an interesting methodology to pursue. And then, of course, the classic game changer, the tipping point, if you like. Once you get to the point where these things are efficient and they're cost efficient, then it certainly gives people a good reason to adopt the methodology. But all of those things were interesting. That gave us a platform. But really, the thing that made it work for us was the rise of mobile. This is what's really brought it all together, because suddenly we could replace, if you remember what I said earlier about the problems that we had with online groups, is that we didn't get the interaction, we didn't get the nuances and so on. Suddenly mobile gave us a way of finding this, of putting this back in. We, for instance, can use mobile to all the various benefits that mobile phones bring. GPS, for instance, the ability to take photographs, movies, and so on, gives us a way of interacting with people which we didn't have before. So it's a fantastic tool for research, and it certainly changes the game as far as we're concerned with communities. But that's not all. And it's not the thing that really gets me excited, because I think the thing that really changes the game is the fact that we don't have to rely on recall. Now, why is this an issue? At the moment, our fundamental tool for research is recall. Every time we ask somebody questions from a questionnaire, we're asking them to remember what they did, the way they felt, and so on and so forth. Qualitative is the same. We ask people in focus groups to recall what they did and what they were thinking about, what they were feeling when they were carrying out a specific action. But can we rely on this? Well, we have a very good example in the last paper, actually. Probably not, particularly when alcohol is concerned. But nevertheless, you know, it isn't that bad a tool, in that if it was so bad, none of us would be here. We wouldn't be earning our livings. You know, we've got this far, so it can't be that bad. But we also know that it isn't perfect. There are recall does have its limitations. For instance, it's probably fairly easy for you to remember what you bought last time you went to a supermarket, particularly if I say, you know, when you last shopped the coffee part of the coffee. You can usually tell me what the brand was. You probably might be able to tell me what the price was and so on. But if I then ask you, how did you feel? What was the need state? You know, what other circumstances were there around your purchase decision? Then your recall becomes hazier. And that is really the problem that we're struggling with. The problem is that memory, oops, I've turned it off. I knew this would get me. Technology always gets me. Thank you. It's a leaf. Memory is subject to flaw. It's not the only thing that's subject to flaw. As I've mentioned, we've always had this problem with recall. One of the quotes that I use from time to time, Johan Lehrer puts it best. He says, our memories are formed by the act of recalling them. It's true, isn't it? We put context into what we remembered. We fit them to what we know best about the world. And in fact, it's not just that. We're also selective about what we say. About, you know, we want people to feel better about us. We want to feel that we're people that we probably aren't going to tell people the real reason why we selected a particular product. It might be spontaneous. It might be a childhood memory. It might be something else. So it's selective. It's not exactly as we'd want it. So what does it mean for us? It means that what we can do is we can overcome this by using mobile, because mobile gives us a better way of capturing those emotional responses. How does it do that? Well, it does it by, if we use the mobile, particularly in terms of its photographic benefits, its video benefits and so on, we can capture the moment. And by capturing the moment, we can then confront people with that, ask them questions about how they felt and so on. And of course, when you're confronted with the evidence, you're in a much better position to be able to comment about it. And so we feel that mobile offers a solution for both of these, both in terms of general flawed memory and also the fact that we are, and tend to be, selective about what we say. So we put mobile into short-term pop-up communities. Pop-up is our word. MROCs are probably the way most people refer to them. We like to think of them as pop-ups. So what do? First of all, we assign specific tasks. So what we'll say to people is, we'll gather them in a community. This is an online community, maybe 14, 15 people spread around using a central basis for dealing with them. And we'll assign them specific tasks. We'll say, okay, go out, film the fixture. Take a photograph next time you're shopping of what you see in front of you. That gives us vital information about price, the competitive set. It tells us whether or not there are any flyers on the shelf and so on. So it gives us a real context for the sorts of things that people are doing when they're in store. It also enables us to collect real-time insights so that we can capture things at the time that people are doing them. And this, I think, is the real virtue. And we've talked a lot about it's fast, it's cheap, and so on. I think it's a game changer because it's real time. It tells us exactly what was going on at the critical point, at the point where people are making decisions. And the other point is that in a community, we can control this research environment. So if there are issues with the equipment, if there are issues with various other things that can go on, for instance, in the infrastructure, we can control this. We can send people back out again, or to repeat the visit, or to repeat the task, and generally make sure that the research is in good condition. So that it works for us in the community because of those things, and also the fact that we're able to control what we're doing. So, it's the leaf again. This is how, at Freshminds, we've used mobile in pop-up communities. And you can see that we're getting people to take pictures of various incidents in their lives. They're incredibly open. They tell us all sorts of things. There's a picture of a baby there, for instance. There's a picture of pictures of a shopping expedition that people have taken, and so on. So they're actually able to give us quite a lot of detailed insight into their lives, into what's going on, and so on. Now, the importance of that, from our point of view, is it gives us context. The context that we need in order to interpret what's going on and why they're making the decisions that they're making. So we're getting a lot of really rich, powerful data. And of course, this is proving to be of real benefit to our clients. First of all, we're getting, as I mentioned, we're getting real-time insights. We're using the voice of the consumer. Because we're collecting this information directly from the consumer, we're not filtering it. They can hear what people are saying, much the same way that we saw from Beth's interview, that it's much richer, it's much more alive, and you can hear what people are saying about your research and about the things that they're doing. On-the-go capture is another important benefit, that they can share their experiences. They get much richer data by allowing us to do that. Bringing consumers even closer, so that as a group together, they can talk about their experiences much more. It gives clients a much better understanding of what's going on when people are purchasing. And it's also, as we saw before, it's a natural way to engage. People find it very easy to use their mobile phones to give us information, and as a result, we're getting much better data. So let me give you a quick case study, something we did recently, in what I guess you could describe as a Mediterranean specialist foods area. The problem with all these case studies, we have to heavily disguise them, but hopefully we can get the main story across to you. The first one is that our client was a specialist food manufacturer. They developed a niche positioning in this market. In fact, they developed the market to a large extent, but their success inevitably brought a lot of competition. So there was a lot of threat from Me Too offerings, other premium products, and so on. So their position in the market was eroded. So what did they do? They needed to boost the brand identity. They needed to find, if you like, their original positioning in the market, but equally, they needed to develop range extensions. So we could do traditional research, typical research, which would give them concepts to look at and so on and so forth, but we felt that it would be much better, much richer if we put them into a community, we got them to talk about the experiences of using these products, of shopping for them and so on. And by doing so, we got them to contextualize in a much better way. So you can see the sorts of things that we're getting from communities. That's our lady who introduces it in the first place. So we're getting a lot of really useful data, but, and this is the issue, and I think one of the issues that we have to confront, we get a lot of data. We get too much data. And in fact, there is so much here that it's so difficult to really make sense of it. And in fact, one of the things that we're doing now is we're restricting the tasks that we give people, because in doing so, we're able to find our way through the ideas much better. But in this case, what we did was we set up a workshop, a creative workshop. We optimized the concepts. We had a number of stakeholders in the room together, the client, brand designers, advertising people, and indeed respondents, really to get them to work together to synthesize this and produce some findings. So that's what we did. They launched brand extensions. They developed their brand identity, and it seemed to work very well. But, and I think this is one of the issues, it's not all plain sailing. We believe that mobile presents its own difficulties. We're all learning. We've all got things to learn about this. Not all phones have the same capability. We talk about smartphones. In fact, this is a smartphone. It's a Nokia. It's 4 years old. This wouldn't start any revolutions. In fact, you'd be waiting so long for the revolution to start, you'd probably fall asleep. We were talking before about the Byzantine operating system that these things have. You know, the problem that you need with these is patience. You know, loading a web page is one of these, a nightmare. So this isn't causing a revolution. This is causing a revolution. And so it's really not accurate for us to describe this as a mobile revolution. It's a smartphone revolution. That's what's making the difference. And in fact, that's really what's going to change the way that we approach all of this. We've also had infrastructure problems, and you know, it's great to have this technology coming along. It's great to see it doing so well, but there are issues. You know, the signals drop out. GPS accuracy isn't always what it should be, and general bugs can hinder data collection. And we really, particularly in a quantitative sense, only have one shot at this. If we don't do it, if we river sample, if you like, we end up with very low response rates, and then you have to wonder about the quality of the data. So it's not all plain sailing. Dealing with the output is another issue, for instance, which I've mentioned. So what have we learned? I'm going to skip this. Make it fun. Keep it simple. Put yourself in their shoes. Now you see the reason for the visual. So what does the future hold? Well, I think we've seen, you know, quite a lot of this. It clearly increased quantitative use. But not in the way that we've typically used quantitative before. You know, mobile surveys are not just about putting things on mobile devices. You could argue that pen and paper is mobile. I mean, you walk around with it, it's mobile, you know. It's not actually what we mean. What we mean is we want something that gives us data at the time, in real time. So we've got to think about redesigning the way we collect research. More effective mapping of consumer journeys, for instance, is one of the things that we should be looking at. And really trying to get and think about a new model for understanding customer behavior. I mentioned before that you know, questionnaires are very static. It's a one-way conversation. People want more than that. We've got to think of different ways of collecting this data. Quite a lot of the stuff that we've been doing in pop-up communities, for instance, particularly around the issues of recall, of understanding how people behave at the purchase point, how they make those decisions and so on, have enormous implications for things like U&A studies, for things like segmentation, for instance. So the challenge is really, how do we collect that data and ensure that we collect it in a way which is friendly to mobile and which is effective? So really, that's it. I just wanted to leave you with that, which is pretty scary, really, isn't it? Is this the future? I hope not. I certainly hope not. But it's the slightly odd graphic, which hopefully reminds you that we're Freshminds. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you. Okay, so do we have any questions from the floor for Bob? I have one over here.
I'll ask a question, Bob. Frank Kelly here. Earlier, somebody presented a presented a test and iterate approach to refining concepts, and you discussed a different approach, which was more getting the stakeholders and doing a workshop. Could you maybe compare and contrast those two different approaches to the research?
Yeah, the reason that we went for you know, a more traditional technique, if you like, to refine was because we felt that we can get more advantage by getting all of the stakeholders together in the room and sifting through the information in a sort of joint way. The problem that we found with looking at this information, which is basically unstructured data, is that we have to put some structure in it in order to understand it. And in doing so, it's a very long and tedious job. Now, text analytics could help us do that, but they're not as developed as we'd like them to be. They don't give us the proper context. They simply don't work in that sense. So we felt that we weren't able to do it. We just weren't able to do that sufficiently well by using text analytics or other automatic tagging processes. We felt that this was a much better solution. I mean, these creative workshops, by the way, they last pretty much all day. They're pretty intense. And at the end of it, we have designers, we have illustrators and so on. At the end of it, we get sort of concrete output. So that's the reason, I think. And I would,
you mentioned, I'm Armin from Microsoft, so you mentioned that mobile gives us advantage to ask questions in the moment, at the time when decisions are made, yeah, versus relying on recall, which is asking respondents a couple of days later or maybe the next day the question. So it brings a question to me. Sometimes when I put myself in the respondent's shoes, and sometimes when I do some things, if you ask me why I did it at this moment, I might give you an answer, one answer, and then if you ask me the same question the next day, when I have more time to think about why I made this decision, I might have recalled something else that had made an impact on my decision. As an example, let's say if you ask a consumer, why did you buy this tea? They might say, well, because it stood out, because it had the right wrapping. Then the next day they might remember that actually their neighbor told them about this tea and it was good. That's what actually made the impact. So, do you think, and at the same time, I understand there are different kinds of questions where you would be more accurate to ask in the moment, like, at what time did you make the purchase? That's the best kind of questions where, you know, and in the moment answers are going to be the most accurate. So, do you think we should differentiate those different types of questions and maybe validate later during the study, or those are the areas that we are allowed in the study and we allow the researchers to find out?
Well, I think the first thing is that we're not going to change human behavior simply by adopting a different research technique. You know, there are issues with the way people recall things. There are issues with the way that we collect information. What we're saying, I think, is that if you use mobile to collect the in-the-moment information that we were talking about, particularly around the purchase decision, by confronting people with this later on in a group environment, for instance, or a community environment, we find that we're getting them, they can focus on the moment to a much greater extent, so that if, for example, they do remember subsequently that they had influences from other sources, then we're able to pick that up. But the important thing is that you don't lose the emotional attachment stuff, which you do if you rely on recall. And really, that's the point. We're not going to correct human behavior simply by doing this, unfortunately. There are going to be flaws in everything we do.
Okay, great. Any more questions from the floor at all? Okay.
Thank you. I'm Rutsano, Tokuai, Tokyo, Japan. I have a question about the last slide. In the last slide, you state, one previous one. Yeah. You state that you noted that a new model for understanding customer behavior as for our new challenge. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions about that right now?
Not that I want to share with you, no. But yes, I mean, broadly, I think that there are a number of, I mean, if you take a typical UNA or ANU survey that we do, and we talked a lot about the fact that, you know, there are 45-minute questionnaires out there. Clearly, there's no way you're going to be able to ask a 45-minute questionnaire. In fact, I'm wondering, the guy yesterday who talked about getting people to answer mobile information for 30 minutes, I'm not sure how he's getting it. I don't know if he's kidnapping their daughters and holding them for ransom or whatever, but it's difficult. You know, you've got to really think about reducing down the time that you have available to ask the questions. So in that sense, then you need to ask the questions differently. And you ask them differently, I think, partly by observation, partly by this ethnography that we're talking about, which the mobile allows us to do, partly by reference back to big data, i.e. the data suppliers have all the demographics, they have all the behavioral stuff. We don't need to ask that again. So there is a model there. I mean, it's not perfect yet, and I don't think we could do it just yet, but there is a model there which would allow us to, you know, break down, and I like the idea, by the way, of asking questions. I think Bruce mentioned asking questions as they, you know, as in a story way, if you like, rather than having everything together in one questionnaire. So there are ways of breaking down a standard questionnaire, asking questions in a different way, and perhaps getting, you know, something which fits the medium much closer than we currently have. That answers it.
Thank you. I've got one question for you. So,
yes,
there's a phrase which I've tended to hear quite a lot of when we're discussing with researchers and clients these kind of projects, and it's quali-quant. Would you describe the case study you've gone through today as being qualitative, or would you say it's crossing into that quali-quant?
Guy, that's a very good question. I was talking about this to someone the other day, and in fact, this research almost is crossover. I mean, it's qualitative in its fundamentals, in that it really is about understanding deeply human emotions, human behavior, and so on. But because it produces so much data, you end up with a quantitative issue. And the quantitative issue is that all of the unstructured data you have, you know, the videotapes, the things that you have to go through, somehow has to find structure in order for us to make sense of it. So that we've got to the point where we really are meshing the two methodologies. And it's an interesting way. I mean, we, for instance, traditionally don't separate quant and qual. I mean, we do in terms of methodology, but we don't in terms of the way we approach issues. And, you know, it seems to me that this technology is going to produce much more convergence of the two. Mm.
Very good. Do we have any more questions on the floor? People are obviously looking forward to lunch. Okay. In that case, thank you very much, Bob.
Okay.